Number 4, Craigslist Horror Stories animated. There's story 1, The Basement Apartment. My name is Cole. I was 22 years old, a junior at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and I needed off-campus housing fast after my roommate dropped out of school mid-semester and left me holding a lease I could not afford alone. The Craigslist listing said basement apartment private entrance. Furnished utilities included $500 a month. Quiet neighborhood available immediately. $500 in Tucson for a furnished place with its own entrance was the kind of listing that made you move fast before someone else got there. I messaged the poster a man named Robert on a Tuesday night. He responded within 20 minutes and said I could come see the place Wednesday afternoon. I drove over after my 2 o'clock class, parked on the street outside a well-kept house in a residential neighborhood near the university, and met Robert on the front porch. He was around 55, retired, looking friendly in a low-key way. He walked me around the side of the house to a separate entrance that led directly into the basement unit. The space was small but clean and had everything the listing promised. Its own bathroom, a kitchenette, a bed, a desk, a small television. I signed a month-to-month agreement that same afternoon and moved in the following Saturday. Before I tell you what I found out about Robert 6 weeks into living there, drop a comment right now and tell me what city you are listening from. And stay with me, because Robert was not what he appeared to be, and what I eventually uncovered is the reason I will never rent from a private landlord again without doing thorough research first. The first few weeks were normal. Robert was a quiet presence in the house above me. I heard him occasionally through the ceiling, footsteps in the kitchen in the morning, the television in the evenings. Nothing that felt intrusive. He acknowledged me when we passed outside and made occasional small talk about the weather or the university sports teams, but otherwise left me entirely alone. I had no complaints. The unit was exactly as advertised and the privacy was genuine. The first thing that registered as unusual was around week 3. I came home late on a Thursday from the library around 11:30 p.m. and noticed that the window in my bathroom, a small, frosted glass slider near the ceiling, was slightly open. I had not opened it. I was precise about keeping that window closed because it faced the side yard, and I was particular about privacy in a bathroom window, even one with frosted glass. I closed it and told myself I had forgotten that I must have cracked it after a shower and not remembered. It happened again the following week. The same window, the same slight opening on another evening when I had been out for several hours. This time I was certain I had not opened it. I had checked it specifically before leaving because of the first incident. I closed it and went to bed and lay there longer than I should have before I fell asleep. I said nothing to Robert. What would I say? My bathroom window keeps being opened, and I think you might be opening. It was not a sentence I was prepared to deliver without more certainty. On a Friday evening, at the start of week 5, I came home and found my desk chair in a position I did not leave it in. I was a specific person about my workspace. The chair went under the desk when I left, straight and centered. It was pulled out at an angle and positioned as though someone had been sitting at the desk and stood up in a slight hurry. My laptop was on the desk as I had left it, but the angle was different from the angle I kept it at. I kept the screen at a specific tilt that was comfortable for my height, and the tilt had been adjusted, not dramatically, just enough to notice if you knew what you were looking for. Someone had been in my space while I was out. I bought a small wireless camera the following morning and positioned it on my bookshelf facing the room. It was a basic model that recorded motion-triggered footage to my phone. I did not tell Robert I had installed it. On Tuesday of the following week, I had a 4-hour gap between classes and chose to stay on campus to study rather than come home. When I checked the camera app that evening, there were 2 motion-triggered clips from that afternoon. The first clip showed my door from the inside opening at 1:48 p.m. Robert entered carrying a small toolbox. He set the toolbox on the floor, moved to my desk, and sat in my chair. He opened my laptop. The laptop was password protected and he did not get past the login screen, but he sat at the desk for approximately 4 minutes, trying different inputs on the keyboard before closing the lid. He then moved through the room in a slow circuit, opening the drawers of my dresser one at a time and looking through the contents without removing anything visible. He spent about 2 minutes in the bathroom. He left at 2:11 p.m. The second clip was from 2:27 p.m. Robert returned without the toolbox. He stood in the center of the room for about 30 seconds looking at the space. Then he left. I sat in my car in the campus parking structure watching those clips on my phone and felt the particular cold that comes from understanding that something you had been telling yourself was probably nothing has been something specific and deliberate the entire time. I drove to the Tucson Police Department rather than back to the apartment. I showed the desk officer the camera clips on my phone. She watched both without expression and then asked me to come speak with someone. The detective I spoke with recognized Robert's name from my rental agreement before I had finished explaining the situation. He confirmed it without offering details, but the confirmation was in his face before he controlled it. He asked me to forward the camera footage to a department email address and told me I should not return to the apartment alone. What I learned over the following weeks through the investigation and through public record research I conducted on my own was this. Robert had a prior conviction in a different county for invasion of privacy connected to a rental property he had managed. The conviction was 8 years. It had not prevented him from renting property in Pima County because the specific charge did not appear in the standard background check category that most tenants run on landlords, which most tenants do not run at all. He had rented the basement unit to a succession of young tenants over the years since his prior conviction. The investigation found evidence consistent with repeated unauthorized entry across multiple tenancy periods. The camera footage I provided was the first documented evidence from inside the unit during an active tenancy. Robert was charged under Arizona statutes related to criminal trespass and invasion of privacy. The full case outcome is part of the Pima County public record. I finished the semester in a university-managed residence hall. I paid more and had less space and slept without interruption every single night. Before renting from any private landlord, now I run the owner's name through county court records in the state where the property is located. Most states have online court record search systems that are publicly accessible and free. It takes 15 minutes, and it is the 15 minutes I did not take before I signed that month-to-month agreement on a Wednesday afternoon when I was in a hurry, and the price was right. Robert had been sitting at my desk while I was at class for an unknown number of weeks before I installed that camera. He had been in my space in the specific and deliberate way of someone who had done it before and expected to continue doing it, and had no reason to believe he would ever be documented. The camera cost $32. I have used it at every place I have lived since Tucson. Story 2, The Wedding Photographer. My name is Cassandra. I was 31 years old, engaged to my partner of 4 years, and planning a wedding on a budget that required creativity and compromise in equal measure. The Craigslist listing said professional wedding photography full-day coverage, edited gallery delivered within 3 weeks, reasonable rates, portfolio available upon request. The photographer called himself Marco Reyes. His portfolio was genuinely impressive. Clean composition, good light management, the kind of candid coverage that catches the real moments without feeling intrusive. His rate was 30% below what comparable photographers in our area of Charlotte, North Carolina were charging. We booked him after a phone call and a face-to-face meeting at a coffee shop where he brought a printed sample album that backed up everything in the digital portfolio. We paid a deposit of $400 and confirmed our wedding date. Comment below and tell me if you have ever hired someone through an online listing and had the whole thing unravel in a way you did not see coming. Because Marco had a portfolio that did not belong to him and a rate that was designed specifically to get deposits from couples who were too relieved by the price to ask the right questions. Stay with me. We met Marco twice before the wedding. Once at the coffee shop when we hired him, and once at the venue for a site visit he had suggested, which impressed us because it seemed professional and thorough. He measured light angles, noted the position of windows, talked about the shooting sequence for the ceremony and the reception. He asked thoughtful questions about what moments were most important to us. My partner and I both left that site visit feeling confident that we had made a good choice despite the lower rate. 3 weeks before the wedding, I tried to reach Marco to confirm the timeline for the day. He did not respond to my text. I waited 2 days and called the number he had given us. It rang without answer and went to a voicemail that had not been set up. I emailed the address he had used for our contract. No response. I started looking more carefully at the portfolio he had shown us. I spent 2 hours going through the images on his website using reverse image search on each photograph. By the end of the 2 hours, I had confirmed that 31 of the 42 images in his portfolio had been taken from the websites of legitimate photographers working in other states. The images had been downloaded and repurposed without attribution or permission. Marco Reyes was not a photographer. He was a person with a downloaded portfolio, a printed sample album assembled from stolen work, and a rate calibrated to generate maximum deposit volume from couples operating under time pressure. I filed a complaint with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and provided the contract, the payment records, the communications, and the reverse image search documentation. The detective who took my case told me there had been 2 prior complaints in the previous 4 months from other couples in the metro area who had booked and paid deposits to a photographer using different names, but the same portfolio images. Marco had been cycling through name variations, taking deposits from multiple couples with the same date on the calendar, and disappearing before any wedding he was booked for took place. The total amount he had collected across the 3 documented victims in the Charlotte area before his scheme was identified was just over $3,000 in deposits. He was identified through a traceable element in the payment method he had used to collect the final deposit from one of the other couples and was charged with multiple counts of fraud. We hired a legitimate photographer with 11 days to go before our wedding. She was wonderful, and the photographs are everything we hoped for, and I have recommended her to every engaged couple I have met since. What I tell every couple now is to reverse image search a photographer's portfolio before you pay a deposit. All of it, every image. It takes about an hour, and it is the hour that the 3 of us who lost deposits did not take. The stolen images are still out there. The photographers they belong to are still working and building their legitimate businesses without knowing their work is being used this way. Marco understood that couples under wedding planning pressure make fast decisions when the price is right and the portfolio is strong. He built his entire operation around that understanding. The site visit was the detail that got me. The measuring of light angles and the questions about important moments. That was not carelessness on his part. That was investment in making us certain enough to pay without looking further. We got our deposit back through the restitution process. It took 14 months. We spent it on the rehearsal dinner for people who had supported us through the whole thing. and that felt like exactly the right use of it. Story 3, the moving sale. My name is Patrick. I was 34 years old, living in Sacramento, California, and going through a divorce that had left me in a one-bedroom apartment that I needed to furnish from scratch because my ex-wife and I had agreed she would keep the contents of the house we had shared. I had a mattress, a folding table, 2 chairs, and a television. Everything else needed to come from somewhere, and my budget for somewhere was limited. I had been going to Craigslist moving sales for 2 months when I found the listing that said moving sale this Saturday, only entire household all priced to go furniture, kitchen items, tools, electronics, address in Elk Grove, starts at 8 a.m. I drove out on a Saturday morning in March and arrived at 7:55 to find 3 other early shoppers already on the sidewalk outside a house on a quiet residential street. The garage door went up at 8 sharp. A man named Craig ran the sale with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. I bought a couch, a kitchen table with 4 chairs, and a box of miscellaneous kitchen items for a total of $140. I loaded everything into the truck I had borrowed and drove home feeling like the morning had been a success. The couch was the problem, not the couch itself, what I found inside it. Stay with me and drop a comment below telling me if you have ever bought something secondhand and found something inside it that changed the whole picture. Because what was in that couch cushion explained why Craig had priced everything to go, and why by 9:30 in the morning, there was almost nothing left at the sale. I got the furniture home and unloaded with the help of my neighbor Frank, who had come along for the truck ride and the company. We set the couch against the living room wall, and I started going through the kitchen box, while Frank started removing the couch cushions to check the condition of the foam underneath. He called my name from the living room, and his voice had a quality I had not heard from him before. I went to the living room. Frank was holding a cushion with his hand inside the zippered interior. He said he felt something and had pulled it partway out before stopping. I looked at what was coming out of the cushion. It was a plastic bag sealed approximately the size of a hardcover book, and inside the bag were stacks of folded papers and what appeared to be cards of various kinds. We pulled the bag out fully and opened it on the kitchen table. Inside were identification documents, a driver's license, 2 credit cards, a social security card, a debit card, a secondary driver's license in a different name. All the cards and both licenses had different names on them, but the photographs on the 2 licenses were of the same person, a man, late 30s, dark hair. There were also 3 folded sheets of paper that appeared to be bank account printouts, handwritten notes about account numbers and routing numbers, and what looked like partially completed credit applications with personal information filled in for names I did not recognize. Frank and I looked at each other across the kitchen table, and I called Sacramento police. 2 officers came within the hour. They examined the contents of the bag on my kitchen table, and one of them went to her car to run information, while the other took a preliminary statement from me. She came back inside with a changed expression. She asked me to describe Craig again. She asked how many people had been at the sale and whether I had seen Craig interact with anyone in particular. Craig was a person of interest in an ongoing identity fraud investigation that had been active in the Sacramento metro area for several months. The investigation had documented a pattern of fraudulent credit applications and account access connected to a collection of stolen and fabricated identity documents. The documents in my couch cushion matched the profile of what the investigation had been looking for. Craig had held the moving sale to liquidate the physical contents of a house he had been using as an operations base. He had been in a hurry. He had priced everything to go because he needed the house empty quickly. He had hidden the document bag inside a couch cushion, possibly intending to retrieve it before the sale ended, or possibly planning to pull it before the couch sold. And in the pace of the sale on a busy Saturday morning, he'd not gotten to it before I loaded the couch into my truck. The documents were taken as evidence. I gave a full statement. Craig was identified and located within 2 weeks. The investigation produced charges related to identity theft and financial fraud across multiple victims in 3 counties. I kept the couch. The officers told me it was mine legitimately, and there was no reason to surrender it. I sit on it every day. I have told this story from that couch enough times that my friend Frank jokes that it is the most expensive free couch in Sacramento because of what it eventually cost Craig. Check what you buy at moving sales. Not invasively, not obsessively, but the inside of a cushion takes 10 seconds to check, and a couch priced to move in a hurry, left by a man who needs a house empty fast, is a couch that might have a reason for the price. Craig needed everything gone. He just needed it gone slightly faster than he could manage on a Saturday morning in March, with a garage full of furniture and 3 early shoppers on the sidewalk at 7:55. I was the buyer who was in the right place at the wrong time for Craig, and the exactly right time for the investigation that had been looking for those documents for months. Story 4, The Night Shift Companion. My name is Simone. I was 27 years old, working the overnight shift as a security monitor at a commercial building complex in downtown Denver, Colorado. The job involved sitting in a monitoring room from midnight to 8 a.m., watching camera feeds from 8 buildings across the complex, logging incidents and calling there the appropriate response if anything triggered. I had been doing it for 14 months. And the job was lonely in the specific and grinding way of solitary overnight work, and I'd gotten into the habit of checking Craigslist during the slower hours of the shift, not for anything in particular, just for the low-level mental engagement of browsing. The listing I found on a slow Tuesday at around 2 a.m. said, "Night shift workers. Anyone else awake at crazy hours looking to text or chat with someone who actually understands what 3 a.m. feels like. Just looking for conversation, no weirdness." The poster had given a first name, only Derek, and then a phone number with a Denver area code. I want to be upfront with you about what I was thinking when I saw that listing. I was 2 hours into a 6-hour stretch with nothing on the monitors, a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and the kind of low-level loneliness that overnight work produces in people who are otherwise entirely functional. Derek's listing was not alarming in the way of listings designed to extract something. It was written like someone who understood the particular texture of being awake and alert when the rest of the world was unconscious, and who just wanted to talk to someone who got it. I texted the number. I introduced myself by first name, only said I was also on a night shift, and asked if he was still awake. He replied in under a minute. He said yes, and asked what I did for work. I said security monitoring. He said he was a dispatcher for a logistics company, that his shift ran midnight to 8, that he had been doing it for 2 years and the nights still got long. The conversation was easy and normal, and we texted back and forth for about 90 minutes before I told him I needed to focus on a shift check and would talk again soon. We texted on and off over the following 2 weeks, always during my shift, always in the 2 to 4 a.m. window when both of us were in the slower part of our respective nights. Derek was pleasant and funny in a dry way, and talked about his job and his apartment and his dog in the specific casual manner of someone who was comfortable in their own life and just wanted some conversation to fill the quiet hours. On the 14th day of our texting, he asked which building complex I monitored. I looked at that question on my phone screen for a moment before responding. It was a reasonable question in the context of a conversation between 2 people who had been talking for 2 weeks. But but it was also the first question Derek had asked that was specifically about my location rather than my experience or my opinions or any of the other things we had discussed. I said I monitored a complex in the downtown area and changed the subject. He came back to it 2 days later. He asked which part of downtown, said he passed through that area, sometimes on a late run, to pick up supplies for his distribution center, and was curious if he had ever driven past my building. I said the complex was near the central business district and changed the subject again. On the third return to the location question, which came 4 days after the second, Derek said he had been thinking about it and that it would be funny to drive past my building sometime and wave at the camera, since I watched cameras all night. He said it lightly as a joke, but the image it produced in my mind was not funny. It was a specific and concrete thing. A man I had never met, who knew I sat alone in a monitoring room from midnight to 8, who had been asking in incremental steps for 3 separate conversations to narrow down exactly where that room was, driving past my building to wave at a camera. I stopped responding to Derek's messages. He texted twice more over the following 3 days. The first was a casual message asking if everything was okay, that he had not heard from me. The second was longer and expressed mild confusion about why I had gone quiet. I did not reply to either. On the third day after I stopped responding, I went back to the original Craigslist listing and found that it had been taken down. I searched the platform for similar listings, using the same general language, and found 3 others in the Denver metro area, posted over the preceding 4 months, all using slightly different wording, but all with the same structure. Night shift worker seeking conversation, first name only, phone number, all in the Denver area code. I took screenshots of all 3 and compared the writing style to Derek's texts. The phrasing patterns were consistent enough to be the same person. I called Denver Police non-emergency and presented what I had. The listing history. The text thread, the 3 similar listings. The pattern of location narrowing questions across the conversation. The officer I spoke with asked specific questions about the logistics of my job. How many people were in the building during my shift? Where the monitoring room was located? Relative to building entrances? Whether the complex had a security protocol for unknown visitors during overnight hours. The questions he asked told me he understood what the listing's purpose likely was. A person who sits alone in a known location from midnight to 8 a.m. in a building with documented camera positions is a person whose vulnerability during those hours is specific and mappable if you know enough details. Derek had been asking for enough details. The investigation did not produce a conclusive identification within the time frame I was kept updated on. The phone number Derek had used was a prepaid disposable. The Craigslist account had been created 2 weeks before his listing appeared and was connected to a public Wi-Fi network at a Denver library branch. What the investigation did produce was a documented pattern across the 4 listings. All 4 had involved extended text conversations with overnight workers. All 4 had progressed toward location-specific questions in the 3rd and 4th week of contact. 2 of the other respondents to the other listings had been contacted by investigators and had described the same conversational arc. None of us had given Derek a precise enough answer to act on. But one of the other 2 respondents had told him the name of the company she worked for and the general neighborhood of her workplace before she'd recognized the pattern and stopped responding. I reported the listing to my building security director the following week. He updated the overnight monitoring protocol to include a check-in procedure with a second staff member at 4 a.m., which had not previously been required. He also changed the visitor login system to require 2-form identification for any after-hours entry request. I finished my tenure at that job 6 months later and moved to a day shift position in a different industry. I do not regret the change. The listing Derek had posted was written by someone who understood the specific emotional landscape of overnight shift work. The loneliness is real. The desire for conversation during the long middle hours is real. He had written his listing from inside that understanding, which means he had either experienced it himself or had studied it carefully enough to reproduce it accurately. Either way, he understood that the best way to get information from someone is to make them feel understood first. 14 days of feeling understood is a significant investment. It was investment enough that 3 separate overnight workers in Denver had each texted a number on a listing in the slow hours of a weeknight because someone had written 9 sentences that felt like they already knew what those hours were like. I was the 4th. I was also the one who counted the location questions. If someone you have never met starts narrowing in on exactly where you are, regardless of how comfortable the conversation has been up to that point, that narrowing is the conversation. Everything before it was the approach. Trust the moment when a question feels like more than a question. That feeling is not paranoia. It is the part of your mind that has been paying attention even when the rest of you was glad for the company.